Children are scared of the other mother. Adults are scared of everything else. That's the whole film in one sentence. And it's the reason Coraline works on two completely different levels, depending on how old you are when you watch it. A child watches a girl nearly get trapped by a monster, wearing her mother's face. An adult watches something considerably more uncomfortable than that, a portrait of the ordinary life most adults are already living, rendered in such specific and honest detail that the horror of the other world almost comes as a relief by comparison. The real world in Coraline is gray. The pink palace is damp and drafty, and full of people who are technically present but functionally elsewhere. Her father sits at his computer typing mechanically while dinner burns. Her mother moves through the house with the particular exhaustion of someone who is doing everything required of them and finding none of it sufficient. They love Coraline. There's no serious reading of the film where that's in question, but the love is buried under the weight of everything else they're carrying, and from the outside, from Coraline's eye level, the love is almost completely invisible. A child watching that opening act is waiting for it to get interesting. An adult watching it is trying to figure out when they became the parents. That's the first horror, and it arrives before a single button eye appears on screen. The other mother understands something that makes her genuinely terrifying, in a way most film villains never manage to be. She doesn't offer Coraline power or escape or revenge. She offers her attention. She offers a version of the life Coraline already has, rebuilt from the same materials, with one adjustment. In the other world, the people who are supposed to love you actually seem to. The food is better. The garden is alive. The father plays a song written specifically for her. The mother has time, has warmth, has the particular quality of presence that Coraline's real mother is too depleted to produce right now. And for a few scenes, before the buttons, before the seams start showing, the other world is genuinely appealing in a way the film doesn't try to undercut with obvious warning signs. A child processes this as the setup to a trap, the candy house before the witch reveals herself. An adult processes it differently, with a specific and uncomfortable recognition, because the other world isn't offering anything foreign. It's offering the thing most adults have quietly stopped admitting they want, which is simply to feel like the people around them are actually there. There's a detail the film places carefully that most people don't consciously register, but that lands somewhere underneath the surface anyway. The other father isn't just attentive. He's playful. He makes things for her. He seems genuinely interested in who she is, rather than in managing the situation she creates. And the real father is not a bad father. That's crucial. He's just absent in the specific way that adults get absent, when the weight of sustaining ordinary life takes up more space than anything else. He's there. He's just not quite present. And the gap between being there and being present is exactly the gap the other world exists to fill, which is why it's seductive, rather than simply frightening, at least for the first half of the film. The horror the other mother represents for adults has almost nothing to do with buttons. It's the horror of being seen clearly by something that wants to use what it sees. The buttons are where the film loses children and keeps adults, because the buttons require a specific kind of life experience to land the way they're intended to land. A child sees buttons sewn over eyes and understands. This is wrong. This is monstrous. This is the moment the trap reveals itself. The reaction is visceral and immediate and entirely correct. An adult sees the buttons and understands something additional, that the trade being offered, real eyes in exchange for staying in the version of the world that feels better, is a trade that gets considered in some form by almost everyone who has ever looked at their actual life and found it insufficient. Not the literal version, but the softer version that real life presents constantly. How much of what you can clearly see would you be willing to give up in exchange for the comfort of not having to see it anymore? That's the question the buttons are actually asking, and most adults have already been sitting with some version of it long before they ever watched this film. Coraline's real mother is the most important character in the film, and almost nobody talks about her that way. She's impatient. She's tired. She says no to things Coraline wants for reasons that are practical, but feel cruel from the inside of being 11. She forgets things. She doesn't have the energy for the garden or the games, or the quality of attention that Coraline needs from her. And the film doesn't apologize for any of that, or reframe it as secretly loving, or explain the circumstances that produced it. What the film does instead is show you the other mother as a direct response to everything Coraline's real mother is not. Every specific thing the real mother fails to provide, the other mother provides exactly. Which means, the other mother isn't a random monster. She's a personification of every expectation the real mother hasn't met, given a face and a voice and a terrifying capacity for performance. An adult watching that recognizes the real mother not as the failure, but as the human being, underneath the failure, the person who is too depleted to be what her child needs right now, and who probably knows it and carries that knowledge around constantly. That recognition doesn't arrive through any single scene. It accumulates across the whole film until the moment Coraline is in real danger, and her real mother is the only thing that matters, and the love that was invisible the whole time becomes the only thing standing between her daughter and genuine loss. Children cheer when Coraline escapes. Adults feel something more complicated, the particular relief of understanding that the gray, imperfect, insufficient thing was the real thing the whole time. There's a secondary horror running through the film that operates almost entirely below the level children are paying attention to, and it's the horror of the ghost children. The 3 souls Coraline finds trapped in the other world didn't end up there by accident. They ended up there because the other mother offered them the same thing she offered Coraline, a more attentive version of the life they already had, and they accepted. And then they stayed until there was nothing left of them to return to the real world. They became memories of themselves, voiceless and translucent, waiting to be freed by someone who managed to refuse the thing they couldn't. A child understands those children as victims of a monster. An adult understands them as a warning about a specific kind of slow disappearance that doesn't require a supernatural entity to produce it. The process of gradually exchanging the parts of yourself that seek clearly for the comfort of a version of life that feels more manageable is not something that only happens in stories. It happens in marriages, in careers, in the accumulation of small compromises that each seem reasonable individually and collectively add up to a person who can no longer quite remember what they were like before they started making them. The ghost children are terrifying, not because they're supernatural, but because the mechanism that produced them is recognizable, and the film gives them almost no dialogue, almost no personality left, almost nothing that identifies them as individuals anymore, which is its own kind of horror, because the thing that gets lost when a person makes enough of those compromises isn't their happiness exactly, it's their specificity, the particular texture of who they were before the trade. The ghost children are whatever is left when that texture is gone, and the film is honest enough not to make that look like very much. The ending of Coraline does something unusual for a film nominally aimed at children. It doesn't fully resolve the problem it raised. Coraline returns to the real world. Her parents are safe. The other mother is defeated. But the pink palace is still damp and drafty. Her father is still distracted. Her mother is still depleted. The gray ordinary life is still gray and ordinary, and the film doesn't pretend otherwise, or gesture toward a version of the future where everything improves, which is the most adult thing any animated film has ever done with an ending. What changes is Coraline. She comes back with a different relationship to the gray and ordinary, having seen clearly what the alternative actually costs, and having found that the cost was higher than anything the other world was offering in return. She plants the garden her mother was too tired to plant. She accepts the life she has, rather than measuring it against the impossible standard of the life the other mother was performing, which is a choice that requires you to have seen the alternative clearly enough to know what you're turning down. That's not a child's resolution. A child's resolution is defeating the monster and going home to something better. This is an adult resolution, the specific and quieter victory of choosing the real thing over the perfect performance of it, knowing exactly what you're choosing and why. The neighbors are part of this too. In a way the film embeds so quietly, it almost disappears. Miss Spink and Miss Forcible downstairs, Mr. Babinski upstairs, they're all versions of people who were once something and are now something smaller, living in the residue of lives that had more in them at some earlier point. The film doesn't make them sad about this. They're eccentric and warm and mostly fine, but they occupy the periphery of Coraline's world as a quiet reminder that the life she's in isn't exceptional in its grayness. It's just ordinary. And ordinary is what the other world is specifically designed to cure, which is what makes the cure feel worth considering, even when you can see it might be poisonous. The film ends with Coraline knowing something most children take decades to learn, that the imperfect people who are genuinely there are worth more than the perfect version of them that isn't, that the gray world with the tired mother who loves her is the only world worth living in, because it's the one that's actually real. Children understand that as the happy ending. Adults understand it as the whole film having been a long argument for something they've spent years resisting, the permission to stop measuring their actual life against the better version of it they keep imagining exists somewhere just beyond where they currently are. And maybe that's the most honest thing Coraline ever does. It doesn't tell you the gray ordinary life is secretly beautiful, or secretly enough, or secretly anything. It just lets you sit inside it long enough to understand what you'd be giving up to leave it, and it trusts you to do the math yourself. That's why Coraline scares adults more than it scares children. Children are afraid of the other mother. Adults are afraid of recognizing themselves in the world she built and in the people who stayed. And in the trade, they can feel themselves considering, even as the film shows them exactly where that trade ends up.